I think we will start. Good morning, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, everyone. And we are going to start our session. This is session number 3, Global Perception of the Arab-Islamic World. We have 3 speakers. And since I am going to be the first speaker for 15 minutes each, I would like to ask really Ambassador Mohammed bin Abdallah from Doha, Qatar, our host, to introduce the session, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صباح الخير جميعا. ويشرفني أن أخاطب هذا المنتدى عالي المستوى من أكاديمية العلماء المسلمين. وفي الحقيقة إذا أردنا أن نبدأ الحديث حول العالم الإسلامي فإن الحديث قد يأخذ أسابيع وأيام، ولكن العالم الإسلامي تميز خصوصا بعد نهاية الخلافة الإسلامية في بغداد بظهور خلافات إسلامية متعددة، وأيضا تولت على أثرها الدولة العثمانية في تركيا مسؤولية قيادة هذا العالم الإسلامي الذي نتحدث عنه. من الطبيعي أن العالم الإسلامي ليس منفصل عن بقية العالم، نحن نعيش في نفس الجغرافيا على نفس هذه الأرض التي خلقها الله للإنسان، وأيضا نتفاعل مع الأمم الأخرى بما تحدثه من تغييرات وتفاعلات سواء على مستوى قذف القوى إلى الخارج أو الذهاب للبحث عن مصالح أو حلول للمشاكل الداخلية التي تواجهها جميع الأمم. عندما ينظر الغربي إلى العالم الإسلامي في الحقيقة يرى صحراء. نحن لدينا صحراء من موريتانيا إلى عمان، ولدينا غابات من باكستان إلى أندونيسيا. هذا العالم الإسلامي مترامي الأطراف لا يمكنه أن يعيش في حد ذاته كوحدة واحدة بسبب تنوع الأعراق وتنوع المكونات الجغرافية الداخلية لكل إقليم من أقاليم هذا العالم الإسلامي. ماذا حدث؟ حدث أن من يملك العلم والتكنولوجيا يحكم العالم. بعد الحكم الطويل للدولة الإسلامية ابتدت تشد الغربيين أو يشدهم الفراغ، والفراغ هي لوحة يرسمها مستشرق يزور الشرق الأوسط ويرسم بيت المقدس في الصحراء، وأمامه طفلة وشجرة وغنمة ترعاها، فتذهب اللوحة إلى حكام الإمبراطورية الجديدة الغرب لتقول لهم نحن هنا في الفضاء لا يوجد شيء، انظروا إلى بيت المقدس، هذه الكنيسة وذلك المعبد في الفراغ. ولا ننسى أن الصورة التي كانت مرسومة هي كتاب في حد ذاته. عندما زرت متحف اللوفر لأول مرة وجلست أمام لوحة أحد معارك نابليون، فقلت للدليل حسنا وماذا نفعل؟ يجب أن نستمر. قال لا، يجب أن تجلس. فجلست أمام اللوحة، قال انظر إلى اللوحة. نظرت إلى اللوحة قلت هذه لوحة رائعة، هناك الكثير من الألوان والأشكال وصور البشر والحيوانات والعربات والقصور وكذا. قال نعم، انظر إلى اللوحة، إن اللوحة كانت هي الكتاب، هي الكتاب الذي كنا نقرأه. لم تكن هناك طباعة، لم يكن هناك كتب، هذه اللوحة هي الكتاب. انظر إلى اللوحة، اجلس ساعتين وانظر إلى اللوحة، ادرس هذه اللوحة. هذه اللوحة كتاب تاريخ لا تمر أمامها مرور الكرام. لذلك لوحة بيت المقدس أو لوحة بائع السجاد في القاهرة أو لوحة الجارية في الجزائر لم تكن إلا كتب ورسالة إلى أصحاب القوة والسلطة ومن يملكون العلم والتكنولوجيا في الغرب: تعالوا إلينا. من يملك العلم والتكنولوجيا ذهب ليحطم إمبراطورية في المكسيك ب45 فارس إسباني يملكون كل الأسلحة والعقل، وجمعوا كل القبائل التي حول هذه الإمبراطورية ودمروا الإمبراطورية، وهذا يحدث حتى اليوم. أيضا هناك صورة لبئر بترول وجمل ورجل بسيط يقف بالقرب من الجمل. أيضا هذه اللوحة أسقطت علينا العالم الغربي في سبيل أن هناك ثراء في الفراغ وهناك خير في الفراغ، ومن يملك العلم والتكنولوجيا لإخراج هذا الثراء في الفراغ وإحالته إلى قيمة مضافة تباع إلى الكرة الأرضية يحقق السلطة والثراء، مثلما، ولا أضيف جديد، مثلما تحدث إخواننا العلماء مساء أمس في الجلسات فيما بعد الظهر. من نحن اليوم في العالم الإسلامي؟ نحن في العالم الإسلامي نتيجة تحطم الإمبراطوريات. تحطمت الإمبراطورية العثمانية، تحطمت الإمبراطورية الأسبانية، الهولندية، البريطانية، الفرنسية. فمن بقي؟ بقي من استعمرتهم هذه الإمبراطوريات على الساحة، دول جديدة، شعوب جديدة تتزايد سكانا وكثافة، وحتى الصحراء ربما من 30 مليون قبل 300 سنة إلى 300 مليون اليوم في العالم العربي والشرق الأوسط. ماذا يفعل العالم اليوم؟ لماذا نحن هنا؟ ماذا يريد العالم منا اليوم؟ العالم ينظر إلينا كما هي قواعد اللعبة لدى الإمبراطوريات السابقة. المسألة كانت أولا حماية خطوط التجارة، لم يكتفوا بطريق الحرير والتفوا حول أفريقيا وذهبوا حتى يتمكنوا عن طريق السفن الحربية حماية خطوط التجارة، واستمرت هذه العملية إلى الأساطيل الحديثة تحمي سفن البترول وسفن التجارة وسفن وسفن وسفن. ومن لم يكن يستطيع أن يحمي سفن التجارة لم يستطيع أن يحقق التجارة أو الثراء أو الاقتصاد. أيضا اليوم يجب حماية الاستثمارات، ليس فقط خطوط التجارة. أيضا اليوم يجب حماية وفرض بالقوة حماية الأصدقاء. نحن نرى دولة في آخر الدنيا تحكم العالم وتدافع عن دولة صغيرة هنا وهناك، سواء في الشرق الأوسط أو في أفريقيا أو في آسيا أو في أمريكا الجنوبية. إذن حماية الأصدقاء أيضا. ماذا يريد هؤلاء من هذا العمل؟ ماذا يريد من العالم الإسلامي؟ أولا أن الإمبراطوريات تحتاج إلى ضمان التحالفات حتى لا تتشتت، ولذلك هناك تحالفات في وسط العالم الإسلامي تتفاعل مع اقتصاديات وأمن وقوة عسكرية وعلاقات تجارية وسياسية. ولذلك فإن ضمان هذه التحالفات هو ما يضمن قوة الإمبراطوريات. نحن خرجنا من الحرب الباردة من تحت إمبراطوريتين، والآن لدينا نظام أحادي الجانب يحاول أن يفرض نفسه على العالم وأن يضمن مناطق النفوذ الخاصة به في العالم. وهذه تصرفات الإمبراطورية: من يملك العلم والتكنولوجيا والمال يصبح قويا، ومن يملك القوة يصبح مسيطرا. أيضا هناك مسألة تخص الإنسان نفسه. الإنسان سواء الإنسان كبشر اكتشف نفسه، اكتشف الحرارة، اكتشف الكهرباء، ولكن في نفس الوقت يكتشف قيمته الذاتية والفردية. ولذلك إن شاء الله سوف يتكلم معالي رئيس الوزراء حول موضوع حقوق الإنسان، ولكن ما أريد أن أتطرق إليه هو مسألة الخروج من الأنظمة الشمولية التي تتعامل أن المجتمع أولى من الفرد، إلى الخروج إلى نظام جديد، وهو أن الفرد مهم بالنسبة للمجتمع، وقد يصبح بعض الأفراد أهم من المجتمع حسب موقعهم وحسب ما يوصفون به وحسب ما يملكونه من علم أو من مال أو من سلطة أو قوة. ولذلك مسألة الخروج من الأنظمة الشمولية هي مسألة أساسية. وحتى في ديننا الإسلامي أيضا وفي مراحل كثيرة كان المجتمع أولى من الفرد، هذه هي القاعدة الأساسية، هذه قاعدة. واليوم أول الناس الذين يكتشفون قيمتهم الفردية هم العلماء، لأن يكتشف ما يملك ويكتشف من هو ويكتشف ماذا يستطيع أن يحقق، وأن ما يملكه ماذا يساوي أيضا على الساحة. وبالأمس تكلمنا عن أوروبا وتحويل العلوم إلى تجارة أو إلى قيمة اقتصادية. هذه حقيقة أن الإنسان يكتشف هذه الأمور. أيضا هناك مسألة التصرفات في أموال البشر والتصرفات في الثراء والتصرفات في كذا. لدينا أزمة مالية سببها الأساسي هو زيادة الاقتراض، أي أن شخص يأخذ 100 مليون ليحقق نصف مليون أو ربع مليون بعد 10 سنوات، ولكن هناك شخص آخر أخذ 50 مليون من شخص آخر يريد أن يحقق 10 مليون في السنة. وعندما يطالب الواحد الآخر بالسداد نجد نفسنا مفلسين، وتتحول قيمة عقار مثل هذا من 100 مليون إلى مليون أو إلى 2 مليون، لأن لا يمكن السداد. ولكن الحقيقة تحولت إلى القيمة الأصلية وما يسمى بقيمة السوق، عفوا انتقلت من قيمة السوق إلى القيمة الدفترية، أي القيمة الأصلية للموضوع. هنا في الحقيقة بقيت مسألة أن الاقتصاديات الحقيقية في العالم، ولا أريد أن أتجاوز على فخامة الرئيس في حديثه عن الأزمة المالية في المستقبل، ولكن الاقتصاديات الحقيقية في العالمية أي أن الناس الذين يستطيعون أن يبيعون مادة مصنعة علميا أو تكنولوجيا أو مستخرجة هم الوحيدون الذين لديهم اقتصاد حقيقي، أي أن الوحيد الذي يعطي ويأخذ مالا حقيقيا ويتحول المال الحقيقي إلى استثمارات. وأصبحت منطقة الشرق الأوسط والعالم الإسلامي في هذه الحالة قوة عظمى مقرضة للآخرين، أي تقدم قروض للآخرين تساعد الأسواق. وأضع مسألة قوة عظمى عالمية بين قوسين. هذه المسألة، مسألة الاقتصاد الحقيقي، نشاهدها حتى في الولايات المتحدة. اليوم هناك هجرة في الولايات المتحدة إلى تكساس. السبب أن تكساس تبيع اقتصاد حقيقي، أي أن المنتج يستهلك كل يوم، وأن الشركة أو البنك يستطيع أن يقترض. وهناك اقتصاديات حقيقية مثل روسيا مثلا لم تتضرر من الأزمة المالية كثيرا بسبب أن اقتصادها معتمد على بيع المادة أو العلم المستخرج. هنا سيدي دولة رئيس الوزراء أتوقف وأدعوكم لأخذ هذه الكلمة وتحمل مسؤولية التعمق فيها. تفضلوا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. باعتقادي الكلمة الافتتاحية لسعادة السفير الأستاذ الرماحي حول الأنظمة الشمولية وحول حقوق الفرد وحرية الإنسان هي القاعدة الرئيسية لهذه المحاضرة. في هذه المحاضرة سنتكلم وبسرعة عن human rights. We are going to speak about human rights, the science and technology and human rights nexus in the Arab world, to show you in numbers and figures the contribution of totalitarian regimes in comparison to democratic regimes in the Islamic world in terms of science and technology. I know that I'll be walking over minds, but with the Arab Spring, no minds anymore. We should say the truth. We should say the truth. Who's hampering and who's hindering our progress in the Islamic world? Why we are backward, and where we have achieved progress, dignity, freedom, democracy, and development followed immediately to overcome poverty and unemployment. I think we have to be frank. As scientists, we cannot escape that the environment we are facing is not conducive to science and technology. The environment we are facing is not progressive toward overcoming our difficulties in the Muslim world. We have, as scientists, to face the truth and really to say exactly what we expect to happen. Scientists who flee abroad, Ahmed Zwail, Abdul Salam, they get Nobel Prize, not because they are more genius than the rest of their fellow members in the Muslim world, no. Because simply they moved from an environment which is hindering their progress, hindering their thought, hindering their freedom of expression, to an environment conducive, where they flow up in the sky without limits, no red lines, without limits, to express themselves and to think freely. And thinking freely brings R&D, research and development. Thinking freely brings liberty and freedom of thought, where you can express yourself and invent and innovate and produce new knowledge. Without production of new knowledge, there's no way. Those who will become the creators of knowledge, they will rule the world. And those who just simply consume knowledge, they will be in the back alleys, among the slums. Their people will be living in misery. And here we proceed. Human rights is foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Human rights came about after the Second World War. The misery of that war in 1945, 3 years later, the people of the world met in Paris, and they produced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Those are really the principles. 30 articles. When you read them, and if you implement them, then you feel that you have given back the dignity of every individual on the planet. You have given back the right of the people to govern themselves, to elect their parliamentarians, to elect their governments, and to really overthrow their government, the people, whenever they feel that they went into corruption and they have not really implemented what the basic rights and freedoms that all people are entitled to, regardless of nationality, sex, national or ethnic origin, race, religion, language, and other status. And they say that if the public discourse of peacetime, global society can be said to have common moral language. The whole human society in the whole planet, we are talking about 7 billion people. They will have one common language, human rights. Human rights is the common language of all human beings. Well, like I said, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came in 48, in 86. Then we have covenants. And the most important covenants, 2 covenants: International Covenants on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and here the acronym CICER, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, CCPR. Those are يعني العهد الدولي للحقوق المدنية والسياسية والعهد الدولي للحقوق الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية. هذول العهدين وقعوا عليه كل الدول العربية، لأنه خجلوا، استحوا في أروقة الأمم المتحدة، استحوا حياة. طبقوها لا. هون هلا حنشوف في الإسلاميك world in the OIC country, those people who implemented the CISR and CCPR, they progressed in terms of science and technology. They progressed in development, and they provided better life for their people. And those people who didn't implement those two important covenants, you will see that مثل ما حكى أخي رماحي راحوا للحكم الشمولي وما طبقوا الديمقراطية. So really they are at the end of the ladder in terms of R&D and in terms of development. Then we have the third, International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Some Arab countries ratified this convention, some others did not. CEDAW, this is again elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Just simply, we cannot neglect the 50% of our people in the Islamic world. By the way, 30% of the wealth of the United States comes from women. From women. When you talk about trillions of dollars, the wealth of the US, 30% of it originated from women working and heading big corporates. CAT, Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and the CRC, Convention on Rights of the Child. Everybody signed the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Then they have child labor. Then we have trade in children. And then we beat the child, whether in the streets or even at home by mother and father. So again, really, Convention on the Rights of the Child, yes, it was ratified by most Arab countries, but really, indeed, no implementation. MWC, International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Family. I understand Jordan, one of the countries, didn't sign this. I understand that because, again, of the refugees to preserve the Palestinian state. They don't want to give what I call full for all Palestinians the rights to forget their homeland and settle in Jordan. I understand that. There is a political reason, but many countries, they didn't sign that. Now, indicators of International Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is really two things. Covenant on political and civil rights, covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights. Those are the two important covenants. And when you see here, I took all the Arab countries to see where they ratified the Bill of Rights. Both of them, they are called Bill of Rights. You can see that Algeria, for example, signed all of them. But go to Algeria and see the violation of human rights. Bahrain, they signed all of it except the one concerning migrants. But again, did they implement that? Comoros, etc. You will see here that most of the Arab countries really signed most of the Bill of Rights, but again, the implementation rate was very low. Also, the Arab Charter on Human Rights by Arab League, 15 September 1994. 42 articles, more than the Universal Declaration for Human Rights in 48. When you read them, oh my gosh, this is utopia. If I don't know the Arab word and I am living outside, I say, this is the word I wanna live in. Every respect for everything concerning child, woman, everything is there. But again, talks, no deeds. So human rights violations were reported in all Arab countries. I don't know this one or this one, yeah. So the link between human rights and science and technology, the link is so strong, so strong. And you will see from now what correlation do we have between human rights indicators and science and technology and innovations indicators. What I've done, that I took about 5 Arab countries, or 5 Muslim countries, against 2 Muslim countries. I took 2 Muslim countries, the most advanced in human rights. And I took 5 countries, the least advanced in human rights. And I made correlation and comparison by taking the indicators of human rights against the indicators of science and technology. And let's see what we've got. Here, I took an example of developed countries. Again, developed countries, when you look at the spending of R&D as % of the GDP, look at it. Sweden is #1 here. Japan, Finland, USA, Germany, France, Europe, as 27 countries, China, Spain, Italy. You will see that the contribution of private sector is written as % of GDP here, and the contribution of public sector is written there. You can see that most of the research in developed country, industrial, is done by the corporates, by private enterprise, not by the government. Because the government, they don't know the market needs. They don't know the consumer needs. Who know the consumer needs and market needs in terms of science and technology and innovations? Who? The people who produce the products. And who produce the product? The private sector. So the R&D of the private sector in industry is much stronger. This is, again, freedom, because you don't have al-hukm al-shumuli, which Dr. Mehi talked about it. There is democracy, respect of individual, respect of private enterprise, respect of investment. You can see that the GDP has developed among the private sector, and they have their own R&D, and they spend on their R&D. All pharmaceuticals, the invention of pharmaceuticals done by the pharmaceutical company, not by the governments, and so on. And again, when you look at Sweden, I don't know. Is the indicators here again showing who spend on, more on R&D because they have more human rights? The indicator of human rights more profound in Sweden, Japan, Finland, more than Spain and Italy and China. But again, China is moving now. Now China is moving. The more they move to democracy, من النظام الشمولي, the more they flourish on the marketplace. Look at OIC countries. I took Europe as an example here, the red one. Then I took Turkey, Islamic country, Turkey, Malaysia. I thought those 2 countries really, as the indicators I have examined concerning human rights, they are really the highest in the Muslim arena. Then I took 5 other countries only where the human right is really much less than others. So I'm going to speak only about those throughout my lecture. I'm going to speak about Turkey, Malaysia. Then I'm going to speak Sudan, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. Now, the first slide here, the gross expenditure on R&D as percentage of the GDP. You can see Turkey is 0.72. Malaysia is 0.72, but Dr. Atar Rahman yesterday told me that they have moved to 0.8. So this could be corrected. So Malaysia is #1, Turkey is #2. Those 2 countries represent or exhibit better indicators in human rights than the rest of the other countries mentioned on this slide. Sudan 0.29, Egypt 0.23, Syria 0.12, Yemen 0.1, Libya 0.08. This is the expenditure on research and development. And the more they spend on research and development, the more you can see that they strict themselves to indicators, they strict themselves to the morale and ethics of human rights. They are more democratic. Their governments are elected. They have multi-party system. They have good parliaments. And everybody can speak and talk. Other country, if you speak and talk, you end up somewhere, probably in a teeth hospital. You cannot open your mouth unless the dentist try to fix it somewhere. And here again, when we talk about investment in science, researcher per million population, look at it. Turkey. Turkey no, Egypt is #2 because they have so many PhDs. But the delivery, I will show you later, the delivery is much less than Malaysia and Turkey. Delivery of research, R&D in Egypt is much less than we will see later in Turkey and Malaysia. So you have Sudan, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. Syria, I don't have the data here. This is why I left it empty. But again, you can see that the more democracy established in those Islamic countries, the more progress, the more science and technology, and the more progress and output of research, and the more what I call progress in terms of capital, in terms of development. So here, why am I going back here? Okay. Scientific listed paper published in OIC countries relevant to human rights. That's 2010. Again, Malaysia is #1 here, followed by Turkey. The world average 148 publications per million people. Egypt is down. You can see that. This is why I said so many PhDs in Egypt, but delivery is low. Egypt, 48 publications per million people. Much less than the world average, much less than Turkey and Malaysia. Libya, again, is low. Syria, Sudan, and Yemen is the end. So you can see, again, the delivery of research in terms of cited papers in the world. It goes with democracy. It goes, again, with human rights, as you can see among those Islamic countries, as compared to world average. Top 10 country in the world for patent and utility innovation application. Only Malaysia there. Look at it. Among top 10 countries in the world in terms of innovation, in terms of what I call exporting technological utilities, and in terms of patents and patents application. It's nice to see one OIC country among the top 10 countries in the world for patent and utility innovation. Why Malaysia? Why? Why? What is the worth of Malaysia? I mean, it's like any other country, but any other Muslim country. But really, because of human rights, because of freedom of expression, because of multi-party system, parliamentary, political party, they implemented really the agenda, the covenant of human rights and political and civil rights. And the dignity of the human being is preserved, and the potential is high. So they unleash the potential of the mind. The potential of the mind just has no limits. And once you have limits, then you go to K economy, knowledge economy. And they went into knowledge economy because of their innovation. And innovation cannot come except with freedom of the mind. The RDA output patent selected OIC countries, you can see Malaysia is #1, Turkey is #2. Again, those are the countries of the OIC which have showed better indicators in human rights than Egypt, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. Investment in science in the Arab region, 70% of research done by governments in the Arab world. And this is why I doubt any progress. To tell you the truth, I have to be frank with you. Look at the private sector in the OECD country. 70% of investment in research is done by private enterprise. I don't think government in the Arab world will catch up with R&D in the private industry in the West. I doubt. Internet, again, 3.3% of the internet use in the Middle East comes really here to show you how. Again, Malaysia, Turkey, they are top in internet penetration in selected OIC country compared to Egypt, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, and Libya. The indicators of Malaysia and Turkey in human rights much higher than Egypt, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, and Libya. The KAI, the Knowledge Index, Economy Index, again, Malaysia, look at it, 6. Turkey, 5.5, and followed by Egypt, Libya, Syria, Sudan, Yemen. It's amazing. When you look at the Knowledge Economy Index, knowledge creation, science and technology, citation, paper cited, patent, everything, it goes in harmony with the progress of human rights. List of selected OIC countries. Libya always at the end was, but here top. So the GDP or the purchasing power per capita in terms of dollars in countries here shown, and Libya comes number one. The income per capita in Libya, $16,000. But when you go to Libya, you find poverty, unemployment, and low salaries, compared to even less than Egypt and Syria in terms of progress you've seen there. Where the $16,000 per capita gone over the 42 years? Amazing. I mean, the individual in Libya, I doubt if he's living more than $3,000 to $4,000 per capita. But here, 16,000, they are top. And this is where I say, again, with the totalitarian regime, the wealth evaporated. And you don't know where the wealth is gone. Jordan, I don't want to go because my time is up, but in Jordan is going now in reform. Reform in multi-party political system, the new law will be enacted, reform in the election law, and the monarchy has promised that the future governments will come from the parliamentarian majority of the people. And there is constitutional, what I call modification, to allow for this reform to come in. Those are indicators on economic, social, and cultural rights in Jordan, right to living, right to development. Right to development is becoming, again, part of the human rights system as a result of the conference held by the UN, United Nations. Right to work, right to education, right to health, right to safe environment, right to women's rights. Obviously, there are more indicators, but I use those indicators as the most important indicators, at least in the context of Jordan. There is a progress. Right to education, by the way, is one of the highest in the Arab region. Right to health also. 86% of the people in Jordan are insured. Only 14% left. But when you talk about women's rights, I think we haven't achieved what we want. We haven't achieved what we want in terms of the rights of women, particularly those who are married from foreigners. Their children, they don't hold the citizenship. And this is why the women activists in Jordan, they are fighting for it. I think this will come with time because some political reason behind it. But this is about Jordan. In summary, indicators show that Islamic countries who have adhered to human rights have progressed toward building a democratic society and have achieved capacity building in science and technology, and ultimately achieve peace and development. On the other hand, those countries that have violated human rights have fallen behind in science and technology, in growth and development, and were accentuated with instability, unemployment, and poverty. And thank you, gentlemen.
شكرا لكم دولة الرئيس. ما أود أن أشير إليه في هذا السياق هو أن القطاع الخاص في مسألة الاستثمارات في مجال البحث العلمي يحتاج إلى ضمانات، والسؤال الكبير الذي يتكرر كثيرا أثناء المؤتمرات والمنتديات فيما يخص القطاع الخاص هو ما هو الضمان؟ والضمان يأتي في سؤال أكبر منه: من يتخذ القرارات نيابة عن القطاع الخاص على مستوى الدول؟ لأن هناك أيضا توفير لهذه المسألة. أيضا فيما يخص حقوق الإنسان أيضا في العالم العربي، أظن أن هناك في وسط الربيع العربي الذي نعيش فيه جميعا هناك مطالب حول تعديلات في الدستور وحول عدالة في توزيع الثروة وإعطاء الفرص لقطاعات الشعب المختلفة وعدم تركيز الثروات لدى قطاعات معينة من الشعوب بدون أن تكون لها للأطراف الأخرى أو مكونات الشعب الأخرى وخصوصا القطاع الخاص فرصة واضحة وعادلة ومتساوية مع الآخرين الذين يسيطرون على رؤوس الأموال، خاصة في الدول الإسلامية التي واجهت قبلنا ربما الربيع العربي في بعض نواحيها، واليوم نحن نواجه هذه المسألة في وسط منطقة الشرق الأوسط. أعطي الكلمة الآن إلى سعادة الدكتور عبدالله شلايفر، أستاذ شرف قسم الصحافة والاتصال الجماهيري بالجامعة الأمريكية في القاهرة وبالولايات المتحدة ومقيم في مصر. تفضلوا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. It's not my speech, so this won't help the translators, but I really think I'm probably the only member of this panel that doesn't deserve to be called His Excellency. It's an extraordinary panel. Today, I will try to revisit the topic I addressed when I gave the Templeton Annual Lecture on Religion and World Affairs back in October 2006. That topic was media and religion in the Arab-Islamic world. Now, this, of course, is a conference organized by the Islamic World Academy of Sciences, and I'm certainly honored to be here, even though I have to start off by admitting that the only connection between the sciences and me is Dr. John Templeton, Jr. He is devoted to issues concerning religion and science, as was his father, Sir John Templeton. In fact, the Templeton Lecture Series that he endowed, and which is organized every year by the Foreign Policy Research Institute, on whose board Dr. Templeton serves, is probably one of the few activities that his foundation undertakes that has nothing at all to do with science. Of course, I'm ignoring what are known as the social sciences, and if there are any social scientists who are members of the IAS here, I apologize right now. But I'm old enough to remember when one talked, at least in my high school some 60 years ago, about social sciences, which is what I loved, but we all nevertheless revered, or at least respected, the natural sciences as science. Yet I'm aware that there are in Islam the religious sciences. So in a very different religious cultural context than that of the West, knowledge and science are synonymous. So in the very formulation of the academy that has organized this conference, there is a problem of communication between as well as within cultures, which leads to another problem. The topic for this IAS conference is the Islamic world in the West, and my Templeton lecture had little or nothing to say about the West. It was addressed to an audience in Philadelphia that was probably made up entirely of Americans, and very few, if any, in that audience were Muslim. But for all the many years since I embraced Islam in the mid-1960s, and then went on to live, work, and travel in the Muslim world for most of my life, I have looked at the world, including the Islamic world, as a Western journalist, but also as a journalist who's been trying in his work, to the degree that it's possible, working in mainstream American media, to build, and then after 9/11, to rebuild bridges between Islam and the West. The subtopic of this year's conference. So I will try at this point to touch upon the role media has or could play in rebuilding bridges, without being a conscious partisan in reporting the news. Because even of causes that I do believe to be very good, not being a partisan means that I tried for about 2 decades of full-time journalism to separate news from my personal opinion. And that's what I went on to teach my Egyptian and other Arab students who aspired to be journalists over many decades. I mean, they didn't aspire to be journalists over many decades. I taught aspiring journalists over a couple decades. Even if journalism in its mode of reporting is not a self-conscious partisanship for the good, and most professional journalists believe it should not be, just to be truth-seeking is in itself a force for the good. In our case, rebuilding bridges between Islam and the West. That's our good cause. Because in the end, truth, as it is said, shall set us free. As for editorial opinion, I try to save mine for those articles and book reviews I wrote for journals that encouraged opinion. And in a book I wrote, an eyewitness account of the fall of Jerusalem. That was a book whose very title, from the viewpoint of those who rejoiced in the 1967 fall of Jerusalem, was considered by them to be an opinion. And at that time, when the book was published in America with great difficulty, which was just a few years after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, my opinion was not at all a popular opinion in the West. But if that book were to be republished right now, public opinion in the West would be far more open-minded about what should be the ultimate fate of what was called Jordanian Jerusalem when I lived there before 1967, and what we should still be calling Arab Jerusalem. There are many reasons for that, all of which points to the way that objective or detached journalism contribute to rebuilding bridges. This has been an ongoing process in which increasing numbers of Western and particularly American journalists who cover events or developments in the Muslim world, and most particularly in the Arab world, have acquired an understanding of the region, and even in some cases speak the language, which would have been unheard of only a decade ago, and which I can barely do at all despite all my years in the region. And there are more Arabs or Arab Americans covering the region and writing directly for American and other Western media. This sort of reporting of the Arab Spring, whether it be the basically nonviolent protests in Egypt and Tunisia that are more thought of now as the Tahrir uprising, has become an inspiration for those tens of thousands of American members of trade unions, or syndicates as they're known in Egypt, but we're talking about American trade unionists, and their sympathizers when they were demonstrating against anti-union legislation in Wisconsin just a few months ago, carrying signs saying, "Walk like an Egyptian." This is in Wisconsin, in the United States, carrying signs saying, "Walk like an Egyptian," and calling the anti-union governor of Wisconsin by his new nickname, Husni. Or take the Occupy Wall Street movement, which is spread across the United States, and it openly credits the Arab Spring as an inspiration in its slogans, in its statements to the press. This would have been unthinkable a decade ago, or even 5 years ago when I gave the Templeton lecture. About a week ago, hundreds, if not 1,000 American protesters took off their shoes and waved them in the direction of Wall Street, repeating by obvious imitation the gesture of thousands of demonstrators in Tahrir Square who had taken off their shoes and waved them at the giant TV screen image of Hosni Mubarak as he made his last faltering speech before being forced out the following day from office. Of course, when I speak of the powerful images that are so much a part of the reporting that's so dramatically contributed to bridge building as a product of television journalism, I show my age. I should be talking about video journalism. For many of those images are now first captured by the use of very small video cameras, but even more likely of digital mobile smartphones that invariably would be posted on YouTube and can go on their own or go viral on YouTube by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, downloading them directly from YouTube, from all over the world. And what is it now? Images of street protests in Syria and Yemen that have been getting out in that same manner. And that's along with the actually scripted video news reports that journalists for television stations or purely electronic online media, like the Huffington Post in America, which has a readership in America of about 5 million people, which is 5 times greater than the largest circulation any newspaper has ever achieved, or online versions of printed press, which have been transmitted. So the printed press online will carry video reports that would have only appeared on television a decade ago. When I started out in television journalism, we used film cameras. Our product had to be shipped in with a script developed in London or New York and edited in New York. Because if our film broke in the development and process at Egyptian state television, it would be just as likely to have been stapled together as spliced together. And even then, we would still have to ship it since there were no satellite feeds in those days. Now, two technological developments revolutionized television reporting from the Arab world, which theoretically then, by the way, Mr. Chairman, my eyesight is so bad, I can't even read my watch. I'm counting, not on the 15-minute rule, but on the 25-minute rule that I read in the instructions a few months ago. But please give me a warning. I literally cannot read my watch. I must get to an eye doctor. In fact, if there's a eye doctor in the room, and that's just an old joke. You know, if there's a doctor on the board on this airplane and then 3 doctors of theology show up or something. Okay, so I'm talking about the technological developments that revolutionized television reporting from the Arab world. And what matters is that we were working with these bulky cameras once we shifted over to video, which was in itself a revolution, and their evolution from analog to digital recording, and we used satellites to get our material up. That was the other technological revolution. So our news was competitive. It could be on the air in America or in Europe the same day as we recorded it. Now, the bulkier our equipment, the more we stood out. And the more we stood out, the greater the chance we had of being arrested and our material seized by security forces in the Arab world, or being pushed about, or having our equipment destroyed by enraged and unthinking crowds. Since my years, when I worked as a full-time NBC producer reporter, the video camera itself has become increasingly, or is becoming increasingly obsolete, right? Another phase in technological revolution. With the increasing capacity of smartphones capable of taking increasingly higher defined pictures or video and transmitting them, or unloading them into a small laptop computer instead of the cumbersome edit pack which we used, and those laptops can now edit digital video to a voiced-over narration by the journalist who's operating the laptop, and be transmitted by that laptop instead of having to go to a satellite transmission point, but can be transmitted via the internet. If there are no professional journalists at an event, any dramatic news event during the Arab Spring demonstrations, then the demonstrators themselves could and have become citizen journalists of sorts by transmitting their own images by mobile phone, which ended up being seen all over the world. So unless a government chooses to close down the internet and mobile phone servers, which becomes increasingly impossible as more and more sectors of business and professional life rely upon both in the Arab and Islamic world. Mubarak's government did cut both services during the Tahrir uprising for some 48 hours, and then retreated in the face of popular outrage from otherwise non-politically engaged sectors of Egyptian society. The www.NewYork, that would be nytimes.com, transmitted along with a text report video reports now that the mother print edition could never do and still can't do. Of course, because that's what print is. The weekday print edition of the New York Times, the closest we have to a serious national newspaper in America, has fallen to less than 500,000 copies, and the Sunday edition never exceeded 1 million copies. Now millions of American viewers download nytimes.com, and approximately 25 million download it in the world, making it the most popular serious online news site. The impact of online transmitted journalism that is furthermore increasingly transmitted online by the vehicles of social media. Social media, you know, that was something for kids, right? Sending messages to each other that maybe we parents didn't want to read. or would be very upset if we did. But the point is, social media now becomes a vehicle for transmitting journalism. YouTube, Facebook, and even Twitter, which is used by professional journalists as an early warning message to the readers of their Twitter that they should get ready for a news story that they'll find on the internet. None of this was going on or is to be found in my Templeton lecture that was given only 5 years ago. So to the degree that rapidly evolving communications technology has enabled an increasing volume of coverage, which this past year has provided very favorable, even heroic images of Arabs, and in particular Egyptians, Libyans, Syrians, as well as Tunisians. Tunisians who hopefully are at this very moment conducting their incredibly well-covered first free election in the history of Tunisia to broad sectors of the public in the West. Now, by well-covered, there were 1,500 foreign journalists in Tunis 2 days ago when I talked by internet with a friend of mine. Yeah, talked, using Skype, which I haven't mentioned. During the February Troubles, when the Al Jazeera English office was closed down, I did video Q&A. They asked the questions and I gave the answers with Al Jazeera English, which were transmitted by Al Jazeera English from my apartment in Mahdi using Skype on my computer. That's extraordinary. And very good, because I'm too old to run, so I don't go to demonstrations anymore. That's one of the rules I taught my students. Don't go to a demonstration unless you know how to run. Now what does that mean? And by the way, that was 2 days ago. Today, I'm sure the number is well over 2,000, as more stream in from Europe or wherever. Foreign journalists covering an election. In Beirut, during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, where Western journalists for the second time in Arab history allowed to freely cover an Arab-Israeli conflict, coverage that actually, if only for a few days, generated a great deal of sympathy for the embattled Palestinian guerrillas who were holding out in Beirut and under heavy, frequently indiscriminate Israeli artillery and air attacks. Now, why this generated such sympathy in such a short interval of time is another interesting aspect of technology. And when I was writing this, I said, we'll talk about it later, and I don't think I ever got around to it, so I'll just ad-lib in a minute. But the point is, there were only about 50 foreign correspondents reporting at that time from Beirut, when you had a very favorable image going out of these Palestinian resistors, to such a degree that Yasser Arafat's popularity for something like 10 days in the United States exceeded that of Menachem Begin. Didn't last long. That's another question to explore, but it actually happened. So anyway, and these 50 journalists, we were working against terrible odds to get our story out of a city under siege, to get the still photos out and the video images, compared to probably over 2,000 journalists in Tunisia today. For the record, the first time the press in the Arab world could operate freely in an Arab-Israeli conflict was when the Egyptian army successfully breached the Bar-Lev line in the first days of the 1973 October War. And Anwar Sadat himself, who among other things was an ex-journalist, allowed the foreign and Egyptian press to operate with extraordinary freedom. Now, in the Templeton lecture in 2006, I was able to close on a positive note because of the impact of, at that time, the impact of Arab satellite television news channels upon journalism in the Arab-Islamic world. And in a serious 24-hour news coverage channel, that's how it happened. It all began here with Al Jazeera. Now, the core of Al Jazeera's reporters have been trained in the West. Many at the very first attempt by the BBC to operate an Arabic language TV news channel. But that channel got to transmit no more than 5 or 6 hours a day before BBC and the Arab funders of that first attempt pulled the plug. A few of those correspondents in that core group of Al Jazeera had been trained at our Center for Television Journalism at AUC before they were recruited by BBC. Now here's the irony. Before Al Jazeera, there was no Arab television news in the sense of covering an event because it was newsworthy, in contrast to some Arab newspapers with an older pre-nationalization concept of history in media. Do you follow me? In other words, Al-Ahram did not begin with Gamal Abdel Nasser. Al-Ahram goes back to the late 19th century. The same can be true of other newspapers, especially in what we call the Levant, where there was publishing that goes back to the late 19th century. That's not the case with television. Television in the Arab world starts, and everywhere it's nationalized, whether the regime is Republican, left Republican, right Republican, or monarchist. Television was state-owned and state-directed. Well, in that case, there was no need for Arab TV journalists. All that was necessary was for a cameraman to cover the scheduled ceremonial event that constituted Arab TV news in those days, when every channel was not just state-owned, but closely state-directed. And the state TV news presenter would read government news agency wire copy while the footage was rolled for the viewers to watch. And of course, that meant there was no script, since there was no TV reporter, and no immediate relationship between the picture on the screen and the TV news presenter's sort of narration.
Yes, Professor.
That's it?
We passed 5 minutes already.
Oh, I passed how much?
3 minutes.
Okay, I got 3 minutes left?
No, you passed already 3 minutes.
I passed it. Okay, I'll just wind up by saying that the Al Jazeera effect was tremendous and has affected all aspects of Arab media, even if it's just cosmetic, and in some cases, like the the independent Arab newspapers that have developed in Cairo over the past years. And of course, these media have played a major role in the Arab Spring. We think of the Arab Spring as we think of social media, the kids rallying together using social media. That was the trigger. But the background to Arab Spring was the constant support for human rights development, protests for democracy, provided by Arab satellite TV, simply in reporting what was going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. By respect, I believe that our audience and the members of the Muslim Academy of Scientists deserve more than excellences and honorable for me. And this is our culture in the Muslim world, so we have to respect you and the other more than excellencies. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. President Askar Akaev. He is from the International University of Moscow in Russia, and he is the ex-president of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. So welcome, Your Excellency, please.
Dear colleagues, I shall speak in Russian. My daughter helps me. She will translate to English. Математическое моделирование глобальных процессов начинается с работ выдающегося американского.
Mathematical modeling of global processes and a successful forecast of the second wave of the world financial economic crisis in 2011 starts with works of American scientist J. Forrester, his student Meadows, that were done at the beginning of the 70s of the last century. And they were commanded by the famous Rome Club. In the 80s and 90s, the leadership in the mathematical modeling passed to Soviet, later Russian scientists. So the models of Forester Meadows, they show that there are limits to the work of, to the jobs of and works of пределы человека. So the models of Soviet and later Russian scientists, they extended their research of Forester Meadows. So the models of first two generations had a serious flaw. They couldn't predict the moment of the crisis, the moment of a catastrophe. Because they described only trend models of global processes. And in the last few years, there were active works on third generation of models and modeling that could predict and forecast crises and catastrophes. So I'm working with my working group on a modeling of social, economical, and development models. And the basis for this modeling is demographic dynamics and the growth of population. So we worked out a series of non-linear mathematical equations, models, that allow us to describe a very flexible model of demographic dynamics in the world and locally. So traditional models used to describe the non-limited growth of the population. And our model allows us to describe the limit of growth of population, connected to the capacity of the biosphere of the planet. So we can see it on the following chart. So the upper curve is the model that describes the non-limited growth of population. It's the model of Kapitsa. And it shows us that by the end of 2010, the population of the planet will reach 10 billion people. And then we'll stabilize somehow and try to reach 11.5 billion people. But if we count the limit of the biosphere growth of the planet, so our model shows that trajectory will change somehow. It will not grow unlimitedly. And it shows that it will stabilize at a point of 5.2 billion people, and that, according to the opinion of the majority of the experts. But there is a group of optimists that think that the population will reach 9.4 billion people. So we looked at the model of the most populous countries in the world, China and India. So you can see on the chart, the red curve shows that China, due to the very strict population regulation policies, so will reach smoothly, more or less, the stationary level of 1.2 billion people. Whereas India, if it doesn't undertake population regulation methods, will reach a population of more than 2.2 billion people and will encounter serious geopolitical and serious ecological problems. And that might result, the ecological catastrophe that might ensue might result in a sharp drop in the population that will reach less than 1 billion people again. And we have to look at the economical development that will provide for the... So usually we use the traditional solo model, which was good for the industrial countries, industrially developed countries and societies. When the key role was played by a physical capital. But the trend is changing, and as we heard today and yesterday from this stage, the very significant role is played by human capital now. So we're basing our work on the model of Menkev-Romer, which takes into account the human capital as well. So we transform this model in a very simple model, whereas GDP is calculated as the multiplication of population, number of population, and the multi-factor productivity. So multi-factor productivity contains the level of education, the level of technological achievement and development, the level of job organization, and other factors. So our model allows to calculate the growth for different countries, developed countries, developing countries. So this model can allow us to make long-term forecasts. For example, we've taken the countries that are GDP growth leaders. So of course the unquestionable leader is China, the United States of America, India has a chance to catch up with the United States, but due to the demographic factor, it will lower its results. And Germany and Japan, they have a very sustainable development and growth. So here we calculated only demographic limitations. If we count the water and the food security, the structure of the population, then the model changes somehow. For example, for India, there is a...
мы хотели показать, как влияет энергоэкологическое развитие, соблюдение экологии.
So on this chart, we would like to show how the environment might affect the growth model.
Мы показали, чтобы сохранить экологию в сегодняшнем положении, требуется каждый год 15% мирового GDP направлять на охрану окружающей среды, не меньше.
So the model has shown that in order to preserve the current state of ecology and environment, we have to put not less than 15% of world GDP into environment issues, protection.
Показать динамику развития отдельных стран со всеми ограничениями.
So I would like to show the dynamics for local civilizations with all the limitations.
Здесь мы провели расчеты для всех цивилизаций, 12 локальных цивилизаций.
So the model has calculated the different curves for 12 different civilizations.
Вы видите, что бесспорно динамично будет развиваться Китай.
So you see a very dynamic development for China, Indian civilization, Buddhist civilization, Far East mainly.
К великому сожалению, африканская.
And very unfortunately very low African civilization.
Исламская цивилизация занимает скромное место.
So Islamic civilization is also has quite a modest place on this chart.
Но это абсолютные величины.
But these are absolute numbers.
Качество жизни определяется душевым доходом.
So the quality of life is determined by per capita GDP.
Здесь картина существенно меняется.
So the perception will change significantly if we take into account per capita GDP.
Что благодаря накопленному потенциалу
So you see that due to the existing potential,
цивилизация североамериканская, Америка, Канада, они будут иметь очень высокий доход на душу населения.
so the Northern American civilization, the United States, Canada will have a very high per capita GDP,
Затем океане, Австралия, Новая Зеландия.
followed by Oceanic, which includes Australia, New Zealand,
Затем Япония, Западная Европа.
Japanese and West European civilizations.
К великому сожалению, у Африки перспективы очень скромные.
And very unfortunately, Africa has very modest perspectives, outlook.
К великому сожалению, исламская цивилизация, если кардинально не изменится ситуация, тоже имеет
And very unfortunately, Islamic civilization as well, unless there are some significant changes, also remains on a quite modest path of growth.
Конечно, исламской цивилизации надо делать инновационно-технологический прорыв, как это продемонстрировал доктор Мохаммад Малайзия.
And of course, it shows that Islamic civilization is in a dire need for technological and innovational breakthrough, like Dr. Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia showed us yesterday.
Ну а теперь несколько картин авангардных стран.
So some charts for the most growing countries.
Борьба за лидерство развернется в 21 веке между США и Китаем.
So of course China and USA will be the obvious leaders and they will contest the leadership.
Китай обгоняет Соединенные Штаты Америки,
So China will depass United States of America very soon.
но после 30-х годов начинается замедление из-за старения населения.
But after 2030, China's growth would be slower, would be slowing down due to the aging of the population.
То есть это японский сценарий.
It's a Japanese scenario.
Но Соединенные Штаты Америки будут устойчиво развиваться.
And the United States, as the chart shows, will have a very sustainable development and growth.
Китай во втором половине снова начнет подъем.
But then our model shows that in the second half of the 21st century, China will start a new growth, a new spurt.
Следующий слайд. Вы видите развитые страны.
Here you see the most developed countries, Japan, and the leading countries of Western Europe, so they will also have a sustainable development, despite all the problems and limitations. So the Islamic civilization. We see Indonesia, Turkey, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia. As you know, the population of Indonesia is triple that of Turkey. Turkey is about 70 million people, and Indonesia about 250 million people. And Malaysia and Saudi Arabia have a comparable population of 25-26 million people. But economic potential, the difference between economic potential is less than 2 times, despite the difference in population. And that shows that the emphasis on the science and technology and innovation that allows Turkey to have comparable results to Indonesia. And Malaysia, comparing to Saudi Arabia, shows that technologies, they win over oil. Sorry. So these are BRICS countries. So we see that India wouldn't be able to catch up with China or United States, and they can only catch up with Japan. They can only reach the level of Japan in GDP. And the next chart shows how we can predict the systemic cyclical crises. You remember that the scientists were reproached that they couldn't predict, they couldn't forecast the crisis of 2008. So we created a model that will allow us to compose trend and cyclical components and forecast crises and moments of bifurcation. This is the forecast of USA GDP dynamics. So you see, it shows that in 2008 there is a crisis moment. And the depth of recession depends on the level of the speculation capital. The more speculative capital is, the deeper is the recession. So this model shows that the next systemic crisis will happen in about 2038. And it will be more deep, and it will be the real depression, Great Depression. But there is time, there is more than 20 years to correct it, try to prevent it. But how can we predict short-term crises, short-term trends? There is a model where a log periodical function is superimposed on the explosive growth. model. So they used to forecast earthquakes, for example. For example, using this model, the Japanese scientists have predicted the Kobe earthquake in 1995. And this model allows us to predict air catastrophes. And we modified and used this model for economical and financial models. And what is important is to understand what are the indicators of the looming crisis. And normally the two indicators are prices on oil and gold, the most highest liquid commodities. For example, the oil prices between the crisis of 2008, they exploded. And the moment of when the oil bubble bursts shows the beginning of the crisis. And then 20 years of prices that are comfortable both for producers and consumers. And in 2002, the new explosion of burst of crisis and the new crisis as a result. And after the oil bubble bursts, the investors rush towards commodities such as gold, palladium, platinum. So for the last 2 years, we have been observing the growth on the gold price, and we predicted the beginning of the new crisis in August 2011. So we superimposed this log periodical curve on the curve of the gold prices growth. So you can see the prices on gold, the blue dots, and the black thick curve is the log periodical function. So it reminds us of a serpent. So when you reach the head of the serpent, the bubble bursts and the crisis starts. So a year ago, the model has predicted that the beginning of the new crisis would start on August the 3rd of 2011. And if you remember, the Asian markets crashed on August 4, 2011, so the next day. So these models, as you can see, allows us to make as long-term forecasts as a short-term forecasts. So now we are working on the forecast of the third start of the crisis, after which a long, sustainable growth will follow. Thank you very much for your attention. And I have copies of my presentation if anybody is interested.
شكرا للبروفيسور أسكر بايف الرئيس السابق لجمهورية قرقيزستان وهو يعمل في جامعة موسكو. نود الآن أن نفتح المحادثة إذا كان هناك أسئلة. أول سؤال في الصف الأول لو سمحت. ميكروفون. ميكروفون لو سمحت.
The microphone, please. Could you repeat this, Dr. Shanshel?
Your Excellency, what about if you have a sudden non-reversible phenomenon, such as world war or natural catastrophe? How can you consider that?
Ваше превосходительство, что если будут какие-то непредсказуемые сейчас события, такие как мировая война, например? Our model can be used also for forecast and diagnostics of the geopolitical turmoils and situations.
В частности, один из моих сотрудников, арабист, математик, профессор Каратаев, предсказал наступление арабской весны. Он предсказал примерно за 1,5 года время наступления арабских революций в Египте и Тунисе.
For example, one of the members of our working group, who is an Arabist by profession, he's predicted the beginning of the Arab Spring as far as 2 years back, 2 years, 1.5 years before the Arab Spring started, actually.
Я должен успокоить вас, Третьей мировой войны не предвидится, но локальные войны будут.
Well, I have to assure you there would be no third world war according to our model, but there might be some local conflicts. Еще один вопрос.
أعطي البروفيسور الميكروفون لو سمحت.
For example, if you take the Iraq War 2003, 6 months before, some people said there's going to be a war, and others said there is no war. How can you consider this paradoxical situation in your
Конечно, эта неопределенность, она всегда остается, бесспорно. Особенно геополитические события предсказать абсолютной точностью невозможно.
There would always be some uncertainty, of course, because especially geopolitical conflicts are difficult to predict, as they are man-made sometimes. Because there is sometimes a political will of some countries and leaders, which are unpredictable sometimes.
С какой-то долей вероятности можно предсказать те или иные геополитические события также.
But certain geopolitical changes and conflicts might be predicted.
Ну а что касается динамики экономического, демографического развития, мы верифицировали наши модели на протяжении 200 последних лет, когда имелась статистика богатая, то они предсказывают высочайшую точность.
As far as socio-economical and demographic models, we checked our model going as far back as 200 years. I mean, as long as the data was available, empirical data was available, and the model proved to be quite accurate.
في نفس السياق السؤال لو سمحت دكتور. Yes, okay. تفضل.
Are the results published, and you said we can get a copy of it, right?
Yes, the results have been published. I have some copies with me.
Да, вот эти работы, связанные с предсказанием второй волны кризиса, наступившей в этом году, мы опубликовали в прошлом году в Соединенных Штатах Америки, кстати, и в этом году в ряде работ.
So the article that predicted the second wave of crisis was published last year in the United States and in England, and I have copies of these articles with me.
Okay, سؤال آخر في نفس there is another question for you, Excellency. Please, yes, one and one, please.
Yes.
Okay, just please, تفضل.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. In model building, usually you start with the assumptions about population growth, about economic growth, etc. Could you just give us a brief idea about what kind of assumptions you had in building that model? Because we can see it later in the paper that we have. So there's no time to answer this question.
На чем вы основываете свои данные о демографическом росте, о росте населения?
Да, ну мы прежде всего используем всю предысторию, то есть когда речь идет о демографической динамике, имеются данные, достаточно достоверные данные, начиная с Рождества Христова.
When we speak of demographic data, there is a lot of data going as far back as the beginning of the humanity.
Так что мы всю эту базу данных мы используем в наших расчетах.
So we use all this demographic growth data in our calculations, in our model.
Верификацию модели мы осуществляли за последние 150 лет.
And the verification of the model we did using the 150 years of data going back.
Потому что начиная с середины 19 века и по сей день имеются очень обширные данные по демографии как в целом по миру, так и по всем странам.
Because since the middle of 19th century, there's very extensive data about the demographic growth for many countries.
Это базы данных ООН, базы данных Всемирного банка.
So it's UN, World Bank database.
Имеются и другие центры, которые готовят базы данных.
And other databases that we use as well.
نعم، سؤال آخر أيضا، تفضل.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, you have made your model with reasonable assumptions. The question is, you see, in nature, there are so many parameters, and you can reach a tipping point in any one of them, and you know, and these tipping points are not reasonable assumptions, they are non-linear phenomena. Question is there an impossibility of including this tipping non-linear phenomena in your model? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we need you to, Your Excellency, to repeat the question. عطل الميكروفون. عطل الميكروفون مرة ثانية.
I couldn't hear it, sorry.
فهم؟ Okay. Just keep the microphone near your mouth.
I repeat my. You see, you have made reasonable assumptions for your model. You know, things behave in a reasonable way. The question is, because in nature there are so many parameters, and any one of these parameters can reach suddenly what they call the tipping point, when the things become out of control, completely non-linear. Question, how do you think about these tipping points and try to take account into a model?
Again. I couldn't hear the question.
Okay, another question, please, here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question also, Professor Akaev. According to your prediction, growth of population, especially in China and India, in 2050, there is very steep decrease, some 0.5 billion peoples. What is the reason for that, and how you can predict such kind of some catastrophic or something other things? Thank you.
Дело в том, что, да, вот этот Китай прежде всего. Вот. Дело в том, что, видите, Китай уже практически завершает демографический переход, поэтому он первым, численность Китая достигнет максимума и начнет стабилизироваться вокруг стационарного уровня. Китай завершает демографический переход уже.
China will reach soon its demographical limit and will stabilize its population. There would be a slight decline and stabilization of its population.
Что касается Индии, Индия находится еще в процессе демографического перехода. То есть там вопросы рождаемости, они все ведут к росту численности.
As far as India is concerned, the growth of the population will continue for quite some time.
Да. Но ограничивает этот рост будет окружающая среда, экология, потому что загрязнение будет излишнее, вот, эпидемии.
But this growth will be limited by the environment issues, because there would be not enough food, there would be epidemics, the pollution.
Ну, я хотел бы еще добавить, что есть прогнозы Организации Объединенных Наций.
There are also forecasts and predictions of the UN.
Последние прогнозы. Раньше Организация Объединенных Наций давала такой устойчивый, перманентный рост для всех стран, для мира в целом.
And UN always used to show always the continuous growth of population for most of the countries.
Но последние прогнозы ООН, они тоже коррелируются с нашими.
But the latest UN forecasts, they as well correlate with our forecasts. They also show the decline of the population in India and China at some point.
По прогнозам ООН, также к середине века население Китая и Индии достигнет максимума и пойдет на спад.
So according to the latest UN research, the populations of India and China will also reach its peak by the mid-21st century, and then will start declining.
Это уже как бы консенсусная позиция всех специалистов, которые занимаются моделированием демографической динамики.
So at this point in time, this is more or less, most of the specialists have reached consensus, those who study demographics and the growth of populations.
اوكي شكرا. عندنا سؤالين سريعين وجوابين مختصرين ايضا لو سمحتوا. تفضل.
Thank you, Excellency. A political question. I don't normally ask political questions, but sir, you are a very successful scientist who became a politician and leader of your own country. And speaking of the Arab Spring, when you faced protests in your country, you decided to leave politics and go back to science and save your country a lot of problems and go back to science and abandon politics. What is your advice now in this very spring-like atmosphere that we are facing in the Arab world to leaders who insist on staying on in power, although they are no longer in complete harmony with their people?
Что вы были политиком, но когда у вас тоже были свои выступления, у вас в стране вы что все оставили, занялись наукой. Что вы посоветуете нашим лидерам, тем, кто держится за власть, тем, кто не понимает, что народ хочет, чтобы они ушли? Как вы им посоветуете пережить транзицию?
Я считаю, что я подал пример, что человеческая деятельность, творческая, она не замыкается на власть, что можно и после власти интересно обустроить свою жизнь. Я лично в своей родной профессии математической нашел это.
I think I could serve as an example of how a post-political life, post-leadership life can be. There should not be fear in it, and one can show that one can go back very successfully to do whatever they were doing before they became politicians. And as you see, I'm very much involved in my economical and mathematical research in my scientific life. And I feel very happy.
Ну, могу посоветовать только, чем раньше каждый лидер это сделает, тем лучше и для него, и для общества.
But one advice I can give, the earlier the leader understands that it's time to go, the better for him and for the society.
Last question, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ahmad from Islamic University in Uganda. The two distinguished speakers, the former Prime Minister and the former President, have made reference to Africa and the role of science and technology in socio-economic development and human rights. Of course, Africa is not doing very well when it comes to human rights, nor is it doing very well in science and technology, nor are we doing well in terms of economic growth and development. Two questions. Number one, what are the predictions from our mathematicians about Africa? You have indicated that it will remain low in terms of economic growth, GDP. What are the possible reasons? Is that the same way as saying that Africa is not about to advance in science and technology, in human rights? What is the relationship? What is actually keeping Africa behind, especially since Africa has a lot of natural resources? And for us as the Islamic World Academy of Sciences, Africa is the one continent that has majority Muslims. It is in our interest as the Ummah to be able to see what can be done to help the Muslims of Africa. Thank you very much.
Shukran. Sayyid Rais.
Поверьте, уважаемый коллега, поверьте мне, я отношусь к Африке с огромной симпатией.
I like very much and I sympathize a lot with Africa.
И, конечно, мне было больно видеть, когда моделирование показывает, что у Африки очень скромные перспективы в 21 веке.
And of course, it pains me that my model shows that the African development would be very modest and the growth would be very modest.
Ну, как показывают наши модели, в первую очередь необходимы огромные вложения в развитие человеческого капитала.
But as our model shows that the most important paramount task is the investment in the human capital.
Во-вторых, развитие производительных сил на основе новых технологий, новых знаний.
And of course, the development of production based on the new technologies, new innovations.
Ну и в-третьих, во время моделирования мы видели, что очень неэффективно используются природные ресурсы. Они добываются в огромных объемах в Африке, но их влияние на развитие этих стран, к сожалению, минимальное, так как будто они в интересах других стран используют.
And of course, the major problem is very ineffectual use of the natural resources which Africa is very rich with. And our model and our research has shown that despite enormous volume of mineral resources produced in Africa, the impact of this volume is negligible, is very, very little. So African people profit very little from all this richness, and this is one of the main problems for African development.
Я искренне хотел бы пожелать удачи и успехов африканскому континенту, африканской цивилизации.
And I would like, from my heart, to wish an African continent, an African civilization, more success and more development.
Я убежден, что весь мир должен приложить к этому усилия, поскольку Африка – это прародина всего человечества.
And we all have to try to help Africa.
Shukran, Sayyid al-Rais. Thank you, Mr. President. Please, I would like to say. Yes, I will. I have an answer also from His Excellency, the Prime Minister.
Concerning Africa, I would like to differ with Professor Askar. He relied for the development of Africa on two things: human resources, human capital, and natural resources. I would say without good governance, human capital and natural resources will go to waste. In Africa, we have countries with good governance. They have developed democracy, human rights, liberty, and really freedom of the people to express themselves, and they release the potential of the human being. and those they developed in Africa. And I hope we will have the pull effect, where those who developed, people, they will start to realize the indicators of development, why they developed. And they would pull other countries who live in misery in Africa. So I feel that yes, science and technology, human capital is so important. Investing in the human being is so important. And utilizing natural resources is so important. But really, we have to concentrate on abolishing coup d'etat, abolishing coup d'etat forever, and the people of Africa to speak out, elect their governments, develop democracy, sustainable development really comes with democracy, and this will lead to human capitalization, and also will lead science and technology to flourish, and what I call natural resources will be utilized efficiently, and Africa will develop much more than other countries in the world. Thank you.
شكرا سيدنا نائب الرئيس. أعتقد أنه بالنسبة لأفريقيا أيضا من الواجب النظر إلى المسألة من الناحية السياسية والعلوم والتكنولوجيا، وهو إلى أي مدى يجب علينا أن ندعو الأوروبيين والدول الغنية والدول المتقدمة إلى التعامل مع الأفارقة كشركاء في التنمية وشركاء في التطور في المستقبل وشركاء في الإنتاج، سواء من المعادن أو من المصادر الطبيعية والأغذية. هذه الشراكة سوف تضمن لهم كثير من إطلاق لبرامج التعليم، سواء التعليم التقني أو التعليم الجامعي، وهذا شيء أساسي يجب أن نضغط نحن كدول إسلامية على أنفسنا وعلى العالم الغربي لكي يتوقف عن التعامل مع أفريقيا كمستعمرات سابقة. شكرا لكم. تحدثنا اليوم عن الفضاء في حقوق الإنسان على المستوى العالمي والفضاء على المستوى العربي، ولاحظنا الفارق الكبير بين فضاء حقوق الإنسان والحقوق المدنية على المستوى العالمي وهذا الفضاء على المستوى الإسلامي، وكيف هناك مجال كبير للتحرك والتطور والتوسع في مجال الحريات المدنية وحقوق الإنسان في العالم الإسلامي. أيضا شاهدنا فضاء آخر وهو تداخل وسائل الاتصال الاجتماعي ودورها في اختراق فضاء الاتصالات. كنا نعتقد أن نحن نحتاج إلى أخبار فقط، وأن CNBC عربية والجزيرة وBBC وCNN أيضا، ولكن وجدنا أنفسنا الآن أمام وسائل الاتصال الأخرى التي اخترقت السوق ووصلت إلى البيوت وأصبحت وسيلة اتصال سريعة. أيضا أشكر فخامة الرئيس السابق البروفيسور على هذه النظرية التي تدل على أن هذا المجمع هو مجمع علمي بحت يؤدي إلى نتائج مدروسة، وهذه هي خطوط دليل لنا جميعا وللدول الاسترشاد بها في بحث مسألة المستقبل. شكرا لكم جميعا. تفضل.
شكرا معالي الوزير. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, all speakers. Can I request His Excellency Professor Adnan Badran to present the speakers with a token of appreciation for their contributions this morning. First of all, Professor Abdallah Schleifer, thank you. We have to present you with the shield of the Academy. Thank you for joining us. Also, His Excellency Professor Askar Akaev, thank you very much. And to our co-chair, His Excellency Muhammad Abdallah Mehi. Thank you all very much. We'll save yours until later, Your Excellency. 15-minute break, please. We resume here at 11:15 for another keynote by Professor Farid Morad at 11:15 in this room. Thank you all very much.